good girlfriend, uh, my good girlfriend has a theater in Florida called the Ice House Theater. It's a repertory theater in Orlando.
Uh-huh.
And she was out there battling the hurricane with her crew and her cast. I mean, just to keep the theater alive. It's nuts.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All right, folks, stand by.
How valuable is it?
In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Hello, 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 Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. And today we are celebrating Rodgers and Hammerstein because the Ojai Performing Arts Theater is doing a wonderful production. They're celebrating the 80 years that Rodgers and Hammerstein have been known to the public. And to help me talk about this, I have one of the producers of the show, Stewart Crowner. I have Richard Camp, the director. Stewart and Richard have been on the show before, and they are long tenured people in the theater world. We'll talk a little bit about their careers and also about the importance of Rodgers and Hammerstein to the industry. Scott White is here. Scott is a performer, and his background is really interesting. He's an engineer, but he actually has a beautiful voice, and he's going to treat us to a little song later on that's part of the show. But first of all, I want to introduce the director, Richard Camp. He's been with the theater for a number of years, artistic director of the Ojai Art Center Theater. Some of the productions that he's done, we've covered on the air, but just mentioned Bless Your Heart was a successful world premiere. Actually, that's his own play. Other playwriting credits: Diamonds at the New York Circle in the Square Theater, directed by Harold Prince; Cuckoo Bird at New York Vortex Theater; Waiting for Garbo at LA Colony Studio Theater, LA Odyssey Theater, Credo, and then all sorts of productions. In his background, a host of TV shows in almost every genre, 3-time Emmy nominee and Emmy winner, and a Writers Guild citation recipient for CBS Capital. Directing credits in Ojai, well, Black Comedy, See How They Run, 0 Hour on Golden Pond, 33 Variations, and Night Must Fall. And then he directed Harvey, and he was on our show talking about Harvey as well. The producers, one of the producers, Stewart Crowner, is here. His background, he's had 55 years in mainly is it nonfiction or fiction?
Nonfiction, documentary, that kind of thing.
Okay, nonfiction television. What has he done? Larry King, Jenny Jones, all sorts of wonderful things that he has won an Emmy Award for example, for Gardens of the World with Audrey Hepburn. It just, the 55 years in the industry. So between, we added up between Richard and Stewart, we have like 120 years of background.
We're very tired. We're very tired.
You're very tired, very tired. So, Richard, maybe you can start the show by telling us a little bit about your choice of a grand night for Ojai, celebrating the songs of Rodgers and Hammerstein. The show is all music with very little dialogue. We're going to hear Nothing Like a Dame, I Can't Say No, My Favorite Things, Cockeyed Optimist, People Will Say We're in Love, If I Loved You, etc. I'm interested to know, how did Rodgers and Hammerstein get together, and what was the glue that held them together, and what do you think about their mark on musical theater?
Wonderful. I just want to make one little addition. I was formerly the artistic director of the Art Center Theater. I am now the artistic director of OPAT, the Ojai Performing Arts Theater, which is headed by our lovely CEO, Joan Kemper. And OPAT is is the company that's presenting a grand night for Ojai. 2020 is, I think you mentioned this. This marks the 80th anniversary of the announcement in the New York Times that Rodgers and Hammerstein had formed a partnership. And I think what happened is, Rodgers previously worked with Lorenzo Hart, and the Rodgers and Hart songs. Well, let me say right away, the Rodgers. Many people say that Rodgers, working with Rodgers and Hart, the things that the words were more ironic, more sardonic, filled with wit. They were cynical. Whereas when he teamed up with Hammerstein, Hammerstein lyrics have a soft side, a sentimentality, and offers a great deal of hope in these troubled times. So anyway, musical theater will never be the same as Rodgers and Hammerstein produced. We're talking about hurricanes now. They produced a tsunami of hits, starting with Oklahoma, continuing through Carousel, South Pacific, The King and I, A Sound of Music. And we just thought that it's time to celebrate. We're living in kind of troubled times, and we want to celebrate some things. And Rodgers and Hammerstein have so many wonderful songs that give hope, that celebrate our life, that celebrate love, that celebrate romance, that celebrate people. So I thought this is why we chose this particular review.
And Stewart Crowner, can you tell us a little bit about your relationship to Rodgers and Hammerstein?
I never dated them.
I know. Okay.
No, I just admire them. I've been a fan of musical theater and a fan of Scott White and Richard Camp too, for all the work they've done in musical theater. You know Scott from Man of La Mancha, and She Loves Me, and I Do. He's a real pro in this, and Richard knows everything about their theater there is. So I am a fan of these two guys and Joan Kemper, our executive producer. But I do not know Hammers and Rodgers, except I think they were wonderful.
So, some of the plays that they've done, the music that they've written, it's part of our vocabulary.
Yes.
Richard, how did you pick, or maybe it wasn't you, how did you pick the songs?
Well, there's, you can actually license an entire review of songs, from the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. So we chose the particular song, review called The Grand Night for Singing. We call it a Grand Night for Ojai, but this Grand Night for Singing because it is a grand night. And I looked at some of the songs, and I think these are some of the songs that everybody can hum along and sing along with and whistle along with. I mean, who's not I'm in love with a wonderful guy? I mean, when a woman comes out and sings that, and it's just like, it just fills you with energy. It's just wonderful. And then some of the most beautiful songs ever written, If I Loved You, and then we think, oh, Gonna Wash That Rain Right Out of My Hair. I mean, this is so funny. Along with Honey Bun, these are a couple of the funny songs that are in the show. But there's completely beautiful songs that Scott will be singing, actually. One is called This Nearly Was Mine from South Pacific, which is one of the most, heart-wrenching songs ever written. And Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, which, if it wasn't the very first song that Rodgers and Hammerstein wrote, it was the very first song that audiences saw and heard, because it opens Oklahoma with that beautiful, beautiful song of hope, Not a Beautiful Morning, that Scott will sing for you in a few minutes. But, and previously in the history of musicals, except for Showboat, every single musical up to 1943 was where the show opened, the curtain went up, and you had dancing and singing and glitter and laughter with Busby Berkeley all over the place. But Rodgers and Hammerstein, changed the course of musicals when they opened with the curtain goes up and this one man comes out and sings this lovely song about what a beautiful morning it is. I mean, it just changed the whole face of theater. And
I was not aware of that. I was not aware that they changed the look of musical theater to be more intimate.
Yes, it's just
Dramatic.
That is their legacy. That as I said, it changed the course of musical history, because it started you saw a show that could tell a story rather than just having a collection of songs. Ironically, we're doing a collection of songs, but the story is that Rodgers and Hammerstein really are the musicals today would not exist without these two people.
I have a question for Stu. So Stu, you're producing this. So what do you do as a producer?
We make it possible for Richard and Scott to do what they want to do. It's about getting resources together, money, of course, locations, venues, crew, staff. We have a wonderful staff, and we always have a wonderful staff in Ojai. It's a place of incredible richness in terms of professional people. And so Richard can pick from really good people, but we help him find those people, help him find designers, that kind of thing, and pay for it, and do the box office and all those kinds of things, which is, we don't trouble Richard with the box office, do we, Rich?
He puts up with our whining.
That's
Right.
That's true.
Yeah. Oh, and why do you think that Ojai, Stu, why do you think Ojai's got all this talent?
Well, of course, you would talk to Ojai people who've lived here a long time. They say it's the vectors. What do you think, Scott? Why do creative people come here?
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful place to live, and it certainly is a place to express yourself very openly and freely. And I think Ojai has a wonderful culture of that. And certainly, theater and the arts are just part of that culture, woven into things. There's, a number of performing venues, and it really attracts people. It attracts people to come and want to live here and certainly come to perform. I'm very fortunate that I've lived here for almost over 30 years and have had the opportunity to perform with some great people and work with people like Richard and Stu on shows like this.
It's so funny because Ojai is just not that large. And yet, the kinds of things that I've covered that have come out of Ojai are pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well,
So
Elizabeth, think about this. It's about 90 miles from Los Angeles, the second largest city in the world and a creative capital of the world, maybe Los Angeles. So people can dip into Ojai from LA and dip out again, or choose to have a second home here, or come in for the day, or come in to see our show. So we are thanks a lot. Our success of our show is thanks a lot to the proximity to Los Angeles, like we have proximity to Santa Barbara, which you get a lot of advantage out of the proximity to Los Angeles. So there's a good marriage. Richard has something.
Yeah, there's a line from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. He said, she may be little, but she is fierce. And that is what Ojai is. We are little and we are fierce. I mean, people here love what they do, especially the theater community here. They love what they do and they're passionate about it. And so that's what we tap into, that passion.
are all the performers volunteers?
Many of them are. We do have, OPAT is a partial equity company. Sometimes we use professional actors, that's one of OPAT's goals is to find young people who want to learn from the more professional people. So we mix them so that they can see, and it worked out to be a nice balance, of people learning and people teaching all the while we were performing and producing shows.
Do you have any ingenue performers in this particular production?
Oh, yes.
We do actually.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
In fact, all the women, well, let's define ingenue, three of the women are in their 30s actually, and one is in her 40s. So I can count all of those as ingenues, basically.
Well, if you would count beautiful and talented as an ingenue, I'd say they all absolutely qualify.
I know, that's fantastic. Hey, Richard Dugan, let's go to quick break. And just a shout out, if you guys are listening and you're thinking, oh, I would love an evening light and hopeful and fun, a grand night for Ojai, November 4th, 5th, and 6th, the Songs of Rodgers and Hammerstein at the Matilaha Auditorium. Tickets are ojaitheater.org. And Richard corrected me, it's an OPAT production. And so this is, when we get back from the break, we want to talk about the songs there, and maybe Richard will introduce a song that Scott has prepared for us. Scott White is going to sing us a little something. So Richard Dugan, let's go to quick break. Everybody mark your calendars. November 4th, 5th, and 6th. Don't turn
Thank-
that down. Back in a minute.
Okay, you're clear.
Is that a laser behind you, Scott?
It's one of the many backgrounds that my company uses when we get onto to Zoom type calls.
Looks good, looks good.
Yeah, it's not a laser. Lasers are straight lines, Stu. This is a
Oh.
squiggly. This is more imagination and creativity.
No, but it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning worried about what should I put in my background, if people see me. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is a radio show.
It's a radio show, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I put on a clean shirt, for Christ's sakes. I'm thinking, what did I do that for?
Well, I'm sure I need hair, makeup, and wardrobe, but it doesn't matter.
So, Richard, do you still want to do a little lead in for the song before I sing it? You want to just say a couple of words again?
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
That'll be perfect. And then I'll just jump right into it.
Hey,
Okay.
Whenever-
Richard Dugan,
Take
do
your
you
cue.
want Richard Dugan? Oh, okay. So he's,
Go ahead, Elizabeth. Go ahead.
oh, yeah. Do you want to do a sound check with Scott?
I'll just modulate his level from this end. I've already
Okay.
got his level set
Okay.
as with everyone else.
My wife tells me that I'm very loud, Richard. Sorry.
No problem. I think I've got enough, what they call headroom and foot room, so to speak. So I think we'll
Okay.
be all right.
Okay.
Oh, Richard Camp, do you think you could talk a little bit about which of the two between Rodgers and Hammerstein were responsible for what? Did one do, well, one definitely a lyricist, the other composer? How the craft came together? Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
I can, not very well educatedly, but I can.
Okay.
All right,
Just-
stand
just-
by.
Just smile a lot, Richard.
In 3, 2, 1, you are live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and we're celebrating a grand night for Ojai, an OPAT production at the Matilaha Auditorium, November 4th, 5th, and 6th. And it's the songs of Rodgers and Hammerstein. A very, very cool evening. Song list is lengthy. It's an all musical show. Nothing like a dame. I can't say no. My favorite things. Cockeyed optimist. People will say we're in love. If I loved you, many more. And we have today with us Richard Camp, artistic director of the not-for-profit company. 7 outstanding artists will be singing. An orchestra, a real orchestra, led by musical director Andy Street. Will be there at the event. Singers Scott White, Laura Deckers. We interviewed them when we were talking about the production of Man of La Mancha. And then we have with us also Stu Crowder is here, the producer, and he's talking about what a producer's job is and his long tenure, 55 years in not-for-profit documentary TV. Scott White is here. We've seen him in Kiss Me Kate, Guys and Dolls, Music Man, I Do, She Loves Me, Christmas Carol, and then most recently in Man of La Mancha. And now we're going to have a treat. Richard Camp, go and take it and run with it.
Yes, we have. We promised you a little tidbit from one of the songs, and this is, as I mentioned earlier, this song and the musical that it was in, changed the course of musical history, and it just the simplicity of the song, the hope expressed in the song, is just something that audiences had never seen before. And Scott White has agreed to do just a couple of lines from "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning."
Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling. Everything's going my way.
How about that?
Excellent, fantastic. Yeah, was it Gordon McRae who kind of
He did the movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Now imagine that song in 1943 in the middle of World War II, and people are kind of depressed and are thinking about something, and out comes this beautiful, beautiful man and this beautiful singer with those beautiful words. It was just lifted everyone's spirits and continues to do so to this day.
You know, I've often thought about Oklahoma, Richard, because there's a dark side to it. There's the evil guy who gets his, comeuppance in the end. And I'm interested to know, who of the two of them, Rodgers and Hammerstein, who of the two of them was responsible for the dramatic arc? Who was responsible for the lyrics? Who was responsible for the music, for the score?
Well, I think you have to start by saying that Oklahoma was based on a book called How Green Was My Valley. And so the basic structure of the story was already existed. So that dark side came from that book. And speaking of dark, you may be aware that there is a new version of Oklahoma that's touring the country right now, which absolutely accentuates the dark side and the I've not seen it, but every one of my friends who has seen it said they really have gone too far by going to the dark side. The woman who plays Adu Annie was in a wheelchair, and she won the Tony. So that was but that kind of casting is wonderful. Diverse casting could bring it in. But many people that I know who have seen the show say that it's just gone too far over the top with the dark side, and they've forgotten that this is a musical that's supposed to make you feel good. So it's interesting.
But
definitely, I think my supposition, being a writer myself, I would say that Hammerstein took the book, he read this, and he said, let's start doing some words and put some words to this, and then talk to Richard Rodgers, and Rodgers put the music to his words. That was my supposition.
Okay, so Hammerstein was the sort of the I would say the playwright, and
Hammerstein.
Yeah.
And then Richard Dugan says Hammerstein. Okay. So he was the playwright, and Rodgers was actual lyricist.
No, Rodgers wrote the music. Hammerstein wrote the lyrics, and Rodgers wrote the music. That's just that relationship, lasted for many years, up until 2022 was the 80th anniversary. But that lasted many years until the last musical that they wrote together was Sound of Music. And in fact, the very last song that Hammerstein wrote was Edelweiss for that Sound of Music. And he passed away 6 months after writing that song. So
did they like each other?
I think they did very much. Both of them were from showbiz families, and really Oscar Hammerstein was Stephen Sondheim's hero. Sondheim, Hammerstein took Sondheim under his wing and basically taught Sondheim how to write musicals.
Actually,
I don't think he did a whole lot of. I don't think he had to do a whole lot of teaching, because Sondheim, of course, is a brilliant genius. But Richard Rodgers' daughter, Mary Rodgers, also wrote. She wrote Once Upon a Mattress, based on The Princess and the Pea. And she had a relationship with Stephen Sondheim in their early days. So it's all, they all kind of worked together and slept together and had good times.
And you were saying something, Stu.
No, I just wanted to bring it back to that Rodgers wrote the music and Hammerstein wrote the lyrics. And Hammerstein his name is Hammerstein II. He's not a junior. His father was named Louis, and he was in the business, but not creatively. His uncle, Oscar Hammerstein, the senior, is the reason that Oscar Hammerstein, that we know, is the second, because he couldn't be a junior because his father was not the creative person. So that's interesting. Why there's not the Roman numeral 2 after Hammerstein.
How interesting. Oh, okay. Richard Dugan's giving us a sign. We got to go to a quick break. I'd love to hear from Scott White how you balance your two hats, I guess, your mathematical engineering hat, and then this beautiful voice and your creative hat. I don't know how that works in your family, so I'd love to hear
I'll
a
be
little
happy
bit
to
about,
talk about it.
yeah, a
Sure.
little when we get back from the break. Hey, Richard Dugan, let's go to quick break. Just a
Yeah.
shout out, a grand night for Ojai, November 4th, 5th, and 6th. Matilaha Auditorium. Tickets are ojaitheater.org. This is a 7-artist show, all music, all the time. And it is to celebrate the 80th year partnership of Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II. A really cool idea. We've been through so much these past months. How about let's just get together and sing some songs we love? How about it? Don't turn that down. Back in a minute.
And you're clear.
I think that's an interesting question, Scott. The left brain and the right brain in your brain.
I'll be happy to talk about it. I think
Yeah.
I think we should actually explore some of the general themes that have gone on through Rodgers and Hammerstein shows.
You mean
There's always a social component. There's
Mhm.
always some sort of cutting edge message. And I think I think this was one of the things that separated them also from a lot of other composer theatrical teams.
Yo,
Did
I'd love to hear that on the air.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's one
So
of the things that intrigues me about their music, actually.
got it. Yeah. Richard Camp, my sister is an equity actress, and she has a second home on Fernandina Beach in Florida. And can you imagine a 50-year-old veteran of New York theater battling the hurricane? It was just so amazing because of the text messages we were getting. It's a hard day.
Wow.
It was like,
Is she okay? Did she survive?
she's fine.
Yeah.
When you look up drama queen, you'll see her picture in the,
Well,
Yeah.
that's interesting. I went to college in Winter Park, Florida, Rollins College, which is a suburb of Orlando, basically. So I was thinking about my alma mater there, what the storm went through.
yeah, as I say, my girlfriend's repertoire theater is in Orlando, and she had, she did just a shout out to all of her supporters and all of her cast members, and it was like, okay, grab anything and come and try to save this theater. It was, and that would be a really interesting play one day. Is a bunch of drama folks in a disaster. You could do the egos on one side and God's vengeance on the other, and the
Here we
egos
go
would
in
probably
3,
win.
2, 1. You're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm talking about a grand night for Ojai. A whole handful of songs by Rodgers and Hammerstein, and 7 wonderful singers. The evenings are November 4th, 5th, and 6th at the theater, and it is in honor of 80 years of the partnership between Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II. And I have with us Richard Camp. He is the artistic director of OPAT, formerly artistic director of Ojai Art Center Theater. I have with us Stewart Crowner, and he is the producer, one of the producers of the show. Both Richard and Stu are veterans of the theater. I mentioned they have like 120 years of theatrical know-how behind them. Scott White is here. Scott and his family have been residents of Ojai for 30 years. He studied voice at Indiana University School of Music. He wanted to sing opera, but he writes that his desire to eat got him into the engineering world. But he's been in Ojai performing. We actually interviewed him with his leading lady for Man of La Mancha when that was at the theater. And I had an interesting comment by Scott over the break about the social relevancy of Rodgers and Hammerstein. So go ahead, Scott, tell us about that. What's
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. I think one of the very interesting themes that runs through, I think, all of their musicals, or certainly most of their musicals, was that there's sort of a social message that tends to go on, or they would introduce and sort of address some issue going on. Oklahoma, as we talked about earlier, with the dark side of basically a shooting in the show, a death in the show. And then you think about other shows such as Sound of Music, with obviously Nazi Germany, and South Pacific, very strong racial component and undertone going on. King and I, same thing in terms of race and class and these kinds of things. And in addition to the beautiful music, which is, we can all hum songs from Rodgers and Hammerstein because they're just so pervasive out there. But you have to consider the fact that they were introducing to the world, through their music, through their talents, some very important social messages. And I think bringing those social messages out from, places like not just, liberal New York Broadway, but bringing it out to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world to address some of these things. And I think it was very important. And I'm always in awe and applauding, because this was happening back in the 50s and 60s. And this is, a very, very tough time to be introducing some of these kinds of topics to the rest of this country and to the world. And you got to hand it to them. They made people come away, and maybe made some people start to think about some of these topics and that needed to be addressed and discussed. So I think it's a wonderful component to many of their musicals.
Go ahead, Richard.
That's very true. And to accentuate that point, they stuck with their guns too. This is an interesting story. When South Pacific was touring in the South, we all know there's a song in South Pacific called "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught" about racism. And many theaters in the South would not let the show be done if they did that song. And Rodgers and Hammerstein said, well, then we will not do that show then. And so they refused to do that unless they kept that song in. So they stuck to their guns. Yeah.
Is that true? So you've
Yes.
got to be carefully taught.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very forceful song. I can hear it in my head. And theaters in the American South in the 60s said, forget it, you can't do the show if you have that song in there.
Yes, this was the South in the 50s and 60s. It's just kind of, still had this, there's still it still is. There's this racial inequity going on throughout the country, but in the South in the 50s and 60s. Many producers of the owners of the theaters would not have that song in the show, and if that were so, Rodgers and Hammerstein said, "Well, stop. We'll not do it. This is an important part of the show."
And then I just want to emphasize that before. I mean, this comment from Richard Camp comes on the heels of him talking about a production of Oklahoma in which the dark side, in which there's a killing, a murder, actually, is sort of a main plot line, as opposed to kind of the full part of the story. And I wonder, do any of you three know of any other shows that Rodgers and Hammerstein did that equally have a new take?
Carousel.
Oh, tell me, Stu.
Rape in Carousel. The leading man, this marvelous, wonderful Gordon McRae type singer, is a bad guy, and it's a hell of a story and very tough. There's not much of it that's very cheery, is there, Scott? Or
no, again, beautiful music. So it's sort of ironic that you have this beautiful music, but you've got a story, and the leading character is not a good person.
No,
and not what we normally associate with musical theater. And I think that they did a brilliant job of sort of bringing those things out and sort of making people aware.
Now, who did that production?
Well, it was certainly, it started on Broadway and traveled the world after that. I don't know who started it. Do you know, Richard?
Well, who did? Well, many people have done that production, but it opened on Broadway and has been a mainstay in theater ever since it's opened. But yeah, as Scott said, and Stu agreed, he's a bad guy. Billy is not a person you want to mess with. But they dealt with it in a way that they could bring out that issue, but still couch it in a musical comedy, musical theater, basically. And Carousel is one of the all-time greatest.
And then the two leads, they sing "If I Loved You" together. Oh my God, what a moment!
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
If I loved you. And she's singing to this guy who's just basically raped her, and that's huge.
Right.
So what do you think Rodgers and Hammerstein would have thought about that?
About what?
About having their plays be turned more into the darker side.
Oh.
Well, I think as Scott mentioned, they were a little on the darker side, some of them. So I think some theaters today are just taking it to the nth degree. I read that, if, for instance, in Oklahoma, he's poor Judd is he's conflicted. He's in love with the girl, and Millie's in love with the girl too. And in the new production, it seems as if the what's his name? His name Billy, the main character, Billy, really encourages Judd to commit suicide, basically. Right. And they've taken that big leap, because that's not really the way it's written. It's just, Judd just kind of, becomes depressed, and he decided to do that. But knowing how, Rodgers and Hammerstein felt about, their production of South Pacific, I think they would look at it and say, well, the Rodgers, I'm sorry to be so scattered here, but the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization is very, very strict.
Oh, yeah, that was going to say.
On how their shows are performed. So if the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization saw this, they obviously approved it. So I assume that they were thinking that Rodgers and Hammerstein themselves would approve of the production.
So Stu Crowder, can you talk a little bit when we get back from the break on how an oversight committee like the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization, why they exist and how that works? Can you talk about that? I did not know that there was a foundation that would say, well, okay, you can go that far with our production. And who runs that? Is it still in the families? For example, when we get back from the break, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
Don't turn that down. Reintroducing, I'm here with Richard Camp, Stu Crowther, Scott White. We're talking about a grand night for Ojai, Songs of Rodgers and Hammerstein. It's at the Matilaha Auditorium, November 4th, 5th, and 6th. And it's lots of songs. It is a lot of songs and very little talk. How fun is that? Don't turn that down. Back in a minute.
All right, you're clear.
Hey, Richard, I don't know if I can answer that question very well. I know that Rodgers and Hammerstein organization is really strong, but you've mentioned that. And they're a typical licensing operation. I'm not crazy about talking about this, though.
Well,
are you?
I'm not really well-versed enough to talk about it too, either, but I think you would be a better person to talk to, being a producer. I would say, as we said, Rodgers, the organization itself is very, very strict about everything, about licensing, and so when somebody approaches them and they want to do a story, for instance, like Oklahoma, and change the tenor of the show, they have to have approved that.
Absolutely. No question about it.
I think that you guys know so much. You know so much about this, and I don't think that people know that you even have to go find the license permission to produce a play.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean,
how that works.
We can talk about that.
Yeah, I know you can.
Yeah, I agree with you guys, by the way. I think that the committee clearly wanted to continue those themes because they're trying to stay true to the art form that Rodgers and Hammerstein were creating.
Yeah. By the way, it's not a fun. It's a bit for business opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Is it family run?
If my-
I don't think so. Do you? Is it family run? Elizabeth wondered. Family run?
I don't know the answer to that.
I know that there's some really heavy duty executives run it, but I don't know if they're part of the family. I don't know.
All right, in 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and I'm talking about a grand night for Ojai. And this is a compilation of many songs by the famous Rodgers and Hammerstein duo. And we're talking a little bit that what interested me was a comment that was made about some of the new productions of the old classics, Carousel, Oklahoma, etc., South Pacific, where there is a committee, a for-business committee, that oversees the works by Rodgers and Hammerstein. And it interested me because I thought, well, I wonder if our listeners know anything about the procedure of mounting a play and getting licensed to do so. And I threw that question to Stu Crowther, the producer on this. So Stu, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, let's say OPAT is our organization. We decide we're going to do a show, She Loves Me, let's say. Bach and Harnick, wonderful show. It was in 1964 or 65. And so it lives with a licensing company who is not so much a committee as it is a business organization to protect the people who own the copyright, which in this case was Jerry Bach and Sheldon Harnick, and I think the lyricist Joe Mastroff. So those three people get royalties. Now, how do they get royalties? By this kind of a policing of the license that goes on. And so we know when we're going to say, we'll sign a deal for She Loves Me, and it's going to cost us $1,100. And we pay that check, and then we get permission from them, including scripts and scores for the orchestra, to do it under a limited number of time, number of performances. It's all very much a business. It's not creative at that point. We can't change anything. We don't do that. But we pay for the privilege of seeing it, and that money goes to the copyright holders, which in that case were the composer, the lyricist, and the book writer, I think. So that's how it works. There's a company called Concord, which has consolidated a lot of these licensing companies into one. And so you deal with Concord. It's easier to find them, but it's kind of, well, it's one company as opposed to 6 or 7 companies that used to do it. Right, Richard?
And we're saying this in the light of the fact that we brought up a topic that was super interesting to me, that some of the productions of Rodgers and Hammerstein that are recent and that have been on Broadway and are now traveling emphasize the dark side, of Carousel, of South Pacific, of Oklahoma, and that the casts and the directors, they need to have this licensing. And then because of that licensing, the productions are overseen by a board of business people that say, well, yeah, we think this is okay to go forward into the dark side. And Scott White was mentioning that, because perhaps a surmise here that because the actual tenor of a lot of the work that Rodgers and Hammerstein did enclose and encase the dark side in a social relevant way, that this committee has approved of the move towards more of the friction side. Right, Scott? Did I get that right?
I mean, I think that's true. It's obviously supposition on my part because I don't know specifically what was in Rodgers and Hammerstein's hearts, except you can tell through their themes of their shows that clearly they wanted to bring these issues out into the public eye. And it would not be to me, it would seem, now it's 2020 and 2022, and, it's a long time later. And, clearly these kinds of issues are still going on and still need to be addressed. And it wouldn't shock me if they wanted to put a little bit more edge on them to try to get the point home. And, it's, as I said earlier, I think it's a wonderful part of their musical
Legacy.
brilliance is bringing those themes out.
Go ahead, Stu.
I just wanted to say, to use the word legacy, it's part of their legacy, which is pretty great. I also think that maybe dark side is not true about all of their shows, but serious is part of the, it's serious. Like dark side, the rape is certainly dark side, but
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah,
relation.
Let's rebrand this to socially relevant.
Yeah.
Socially relevant. There you go.
Not
Yeah,
dark
that's better.
side. Yeah.
Because it
Right,
wasn't
okay.
always dark. It was sometimes just really like hitting racism. That's a socially relevant topic. It still is today.
Yeah.
And they were certainly, putting it out there and making it, getting it in the light of day is, I think,
It was
really
serious.
important.
Serious stuff. Yeah.
Oh, it was so serious that when they were taking South Pacific to the American South, you've got to be carefully taught. A song in that production was banned. So they said, forget it. We're not doing it here. It's interesting. I didn't know that. Maybe when we get with Richard's telling us we got to go to quick break, but maybe we get back from the break. What I'm interested in, as Richard, how did you do the costumes here for this production? So when we get back from the break, Richard, tell me, I'm wondering if they're thematic to the shows or if you just said, okay, just wear evening clothes, etc. So Richard Dugan, let's go to quick
Yes,
break. And then
Elizabeth.
we'll talk a little bit about what you're going to see. We already know what you're going to hear. Let's talk about what you're going to see. Don't turn that down. Back in a minute. A grand night for Ojai, November 4th through the 6th.
You are clear.
It's interesting. I love to interview Santa Barbara High School drama department. Whenever they do a production, I always try to go. I love high school musical theater. I love the energy, and their drama teacher is fantastic. And he is not afraid to put these kids in various shows that are really challenging. Sweeney Todd, for example, so these are high school kids, and it's like, well, when I interview these kids, they're like the maturity level of 42-year-olds.
Right. Yeah.
I saw a production, high school production of Ojai of South Pacific here, and Emil DeBeck, who's supposed to be 55, was played by a 17-year-old boy trying to sing those songs. It was a leap of faith, although God love you, he was a really good kid and he's trying hard, but gee, it is tough to accept that, I think.
But what I'm saying, Stu, is that, some of the themes that some of these high school drama teachers, they're not afraid of. I mean, in the light of the fact that some of these high schools are banning books, that they're actually, the drama department is saying, forget it, we're going to do our own cutting edge stuff. And it's interesting to me because here in Santa Barbara, like I said, Santa Barbara High, he's just like, okay, fine. If you parents don't like it, that's fine too.
Nordoff High School recently did Something Rotten, which is a farcical musical, and there's some cutting edge language in there.
All right, stand by. You've got 5 minutes. In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, and it's so interesting. We're talking about the Grand Night for Ojai, in which Richard Camp, the director, and Stu Crowner, the producer, they're bringing Ojai some lightness and some beautiful music from many productions by Rodgers and Hammerstein. And we started to talk a little bit about the social relevancy and how, the theater is a growing organization. The theater moves with the times, and were talking about that. It was so interesting to me, and I thank you guys for that. I want to talk a little bit about how Richard's done his costuming for Grand Night for Ojai. You know, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if you're going to be doing something from South Pacific, you know, maybe you're going to be in tight pants and no shirt, you know, like we saw in South Pacific. So how are you costuming, Richard?
Well, that's exactly what I thought for Scott, tight pants and no shirt. But,
No, thank you. No, thank you.
No, I love this question because what we're going to do, I mean, traditionally, you would think that you would have ball gowns and tuxedos for a show like this. But my take on this is that this is an Ojai. It's why we call it a Grand Night for Ojai. It's people in casual clothes and talking about things that happen to them in Ojai. You know, the songs are about things that happen to them in Ojai. So what we're doing, the theme of the costumes and the theme of the choreography and the theme of the whole play is find what feels good. So when we have our first rehearsal, this is a surprise to Scott, so I'm asking the entire cast to come dressed as if they were going to dinner at their favorite upscale restaurant. So it's, you know, upscale casual, basically. And we're going to have our costumer, who is Kyle Crowner, who is Stu Crowner's wife. She will come to that meeting. She will look and see what the actors have come up with and work from that so that we have a very casual, find what feels good look to the show. Very, very, you know, easy and open and cash.
So I often wear shorts and flip-flops to dinner in Ojai, Richard. Is that okay?
That's very Ojai.
You need to go to a better restaurant.
Now you mentioned, Richard, there's choreography as well.
Yes, there is choreography. It's a small amount of choreography. We call it stage movement. But again, this is the same feeling as the theme. Our choreographer, the wonderful Julie Hammond, she was explaining to me the other day that if she does a movement that feels natural and good to her, that does not necessarily translate to the dancer that she is talking to. That dancer may not feel as comfortable doing that move as she did. So she will let the dancer explore and move in the way that he or she feels better. And so she actually used the phrase, find what feels good. So that's basically, that's why I made that's the theme of the entire show, really, find what feels good.
It's about time, right? We've been through so much, and now we all are talking, by the way, dear listener, we're all talking during the break about our friends in Florida who are in the theater world and how, you know, how much they've been through, just try to keep their theater out of the hurricane. A Grand Night for Ojai, November 4th, 5th, and 6th, Matilaha Auditorium. Get your tickets, ojaitheater.org. It's going to be 7 performers singing their hearts out all night long, no talk, all music. And we're hearing now that it'll be an effort to find what feels good. Get your inner Ojai on and find what feels good. Thank you, guys. Kyle is our costume, I guess, our costumer, right? As Stu's wife. Stu, thank you very much. Scott White, Richard Camp, thanks as always. And I'll see you on the 4th. Bye.
Oh, do come. Yeah, come.
Bye-bye.
Okay, you're clear. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
That was fantastic because, you know, I just thought we'd be all sweetness and light, and then we kind of went into, you know, some of the nuts and bolts of what it takes to keep a theme alive or a show alive, and the show's got to move with the times, I guess. Right. Very interesting. Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you very much.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.